The Vaxian Imperial Armada maintained its stance along the fringe of the region humans labeled the Kepler Expanse, and their arrays were tirelessly sweeping for any trace of the crude craft they had monitored for months already. Commander Zelthor stood rigid upon the command deck of his war flagship known as Dominion's Wrath, and he carried total certainty in the supremacy of his formation that extended through the void like a barrier of forged steel and dominance. The briefings that had circulated across his terminal throughout the past year all indicated the same conclusion, which was that human civilization retained merely the most basic interstellar abilities, and they struggled to reach their own satellite with any reliability. Their vessels were sluggish and awkward, and their armaments were pitiful when placed beside the might of the Empire. And Zelthor had marshaled flotillas against scores of undeveloped races in the past, and this would be no different. He predicted a swift triumph accompanied by the routine enforcement measures, and then Earth would be converted into another extraction post in the expansion of Vaxian dominion. The sensor technician abruptly froze at his console, and his fingers darted across the interface as though he refused to accept the data before him. His tone emerged taut and confused when he reported that they were registering a gravitational disturbance forming directly ahead of their location. Zelthor shifted his focus toward the primary display and waited for whatever phantom, return or drifting debris cluster had prompted the warning. But what surfaced from the rupture of space caused his pulse to falter in a way he had never endured during 3 decades of service in the military. The construct was vast, and it overshadowed the dreadnought in his formation, bite-wise the burden and capacity. Its exterior shimmered with a mysterious metal that appeared to absorb the glow of nearby stars and twisted, unsettling ways that made direct viewing painful. The outer layer was sleek and untouched by the usual assembly joints and observation ports that defined conventional ship construction, and instead it resembled something that had been cultivated rather than forged. Unfamiliar energy emissions rippled along its structure in sequences that failed to match anything within the Imperial archives, and the scanning officer was desperately attempting to decode the signals, but the system continually generated failure notices. The vessel's architecture differed from anything Zelthor had encountered in his long career, and it fused flowing contours and sharp edges in a manner that implied an entirely foreign method of science and design. Inside the human craft carrying the identifier USS Constellation, according to its transponder beacon that abruptly activated across every bandwidth, Captain Jake Morrison stood composed upon his command deck while his personnel moved with seasoned precision around him. Each specialist concentrated fully on their console and displayed no fear or disorder, despite being outnumbered more than 200 to 1. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Martinez occupied the tactical console, and her gaze followed the swarm of alien warships that were struggling to realign themselves in reaction to the Constellation's unexpected arrival. The enemy formation had been holding a routine patrol pattern, but now they were bunching together like startled sea creatures. Their weapons were charging, though none had discharged a shot. Morrison studied the strategic monitor with the steady demeanor of a man who had rehearsed this precise event for years, and he had conducted innumerable drills and combat scenarios until every potential reaction was etched. His team had practiced in secrecy for this singular and critical day, and its power reading by itself hinted at armaments capable of shattering worlds. The Vaxian command hierarchy plunged into complete turmoil within moments of the human vessel's arrival, and Fleet Admiral Corvus was shouting furious demands across every comm channel, insisting someone clarify how this devastating intelligence collapse had transpired. His image dominated several holographic panels across the command deck of Dominion's Wrath, and his rage was evident in every strained contour of his expression. Personnel hurried to access archives and dossiers and surveillance logs, but none of it aligned in any meaningful way with the colossal battleship, now looming ahead like a quiet guarantee of annihilation. By all spy frameworks and every probe and every hidden orbital monitor the Empire had deployed around Earth's system, the humans were still wrestling with primitive fusion propulsion. They possessed no defensive fields worth noting and no weaponry that could endanger even the smallest Imperial reconnaissance craft, and their largest known ship could scarcely sustain a crew of 20 beyond their lunar orbit. Zelthor attempted to preserve a trace of command over his bridge officers, but he sensed his confidence collapsing with each ticking moment. His deputy was demanding clarifications from the Intelligence Bureau, but the evaluators could offer only halting replies about how their findings had been authenticated and cross-checked and validated through several independent means. One officer proposed the possibility that the humans had been aided by another advanced species, but that theory failed as well because Earth resided in an isolated corner of the galaxy that most developed civilizations disregarded entirely. The closest major authority was the Galactic Council itself. They upheld strict non-intervention rules concerning undeveloped worlds. And furthermore, the Council would never arm a developing civilization with armament technology capable of destabilizing the sector entirely. Before Zelthor could devise any countermeasure or tactical plan, the human vessel suddenly broadcast across all Imperial channels. The voice that resonated through every speaker on every bridge in the fleet was calm, measured, and spoke flawless Vaxian with no accent or translation device. Delay. The voice introduced itself as Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Space Navy ship Constellation, declaring that they arrived in peace, yet were fully ready for any eventuality. The transmission continued with details that made Zelthor's heart skip multiple beats, as Morrison explicitly stated that the Vaxian fleet had crossed the neutral zone established by the Galactic Council and had precisely 1 hour to retreat beyond the marked boundaries or face immediate military consequences. Zelthor felt his legs weaken slightly and gripped the edge of his console to stabilize himself. The humans were aware of the Galactic Council. That single revelation was even more staggering than the appearance of their seemingly impossible battleship. Earth had been intended to remain entirely isolated and deliberately unaware of the broader galactic civilization until the Empire could properly evaluate the planet and determine the optimal method of conquest. Quarantine protocols had been enforced for over a decade, designed to prevent any contact between Earth and Council civilizations. If the humans had somehow established communication with the Council, everything shifted, and the Empire could no longer simply invade without, triggering a cascade of diplomatic crises and potential armed conflicts with other interstellar powers. On board the Constellation, Lieutenant Ben Parker coordinated the tactical response teams, while Commander Lisa Martinez ran probability simulations through the vessel's advanced computer systems. Every conceivable scenario had been wargamed and tested hundreds of times during their preparation. Yet this stunned silence from the Vaxian fleet was unforeseen and had not appeared in any simulation. The alien warships remained stationary in space, weapons charged but inactive, and their formation was beginning to fracture as individual captains waited for orders that never arrived. Martinez updated her tactical interface and noticed several smaller Vaxian craft retreating from the Constellation, as though their commanders had independently decided discretion was the wiser choice. Ensign Claire Hopkins reported from the sensor station massive power fluctuations across the Vaxian formation, suggesting indecision between engagement and retreat. Morrison exchanged a loaded glance with his first officer, Commander Greg Sullivan, both understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity entered the galactic community as equals or as subjugated prey. Sullivan had been with Morrison since the project's inception and understood his captain's thought process almost as well as his own. At that moment, he saw Morrison evaluating odds and options with the same concentrated intensity he always displayed during crises. Morrison's was centuries ahead of anything Earth had developed on its own. Commander Helen Price had been a junior officer at the time, participating in the initial recovery team that retrieved the strange metallic orb from the ocean floor. She recalled the precise moment scientists accessed the probes databanks and uncovered that Earth had been under observation by an alien empire that regarded humanity as little more than a future resource to exploit. That revelation had transformed everything, triggering a covert program that would ultimately produce ships like the Constellation. Price had advanced through the ranks as the program expanded, and she now held the title of Admiral, overseeing Earth's entire defensive strategy from a fortified command center buried deep below the surface. Within that secure facility, Price sat alongside Director Paul Griffin, who managed the Strategic Defense Initiative, and Dr. Laura Bennett, head of the Xenotechnology Research Division. They observed the confrontation in real time through quantum-encrypted feeds, linking directly to the constellation's sensor arrays. Bennett analyzed the incoming data with clinical detachment, noting that the Vaxians remained oblivious to the true nature of what they faced. The aliens assumed that humanity had developed this technology independently through their own ingenuity. But that was precisely the deception Earth's strategists intended. Admiral Price nodded in agreement, emphasizing the need to maintain the illusion as long as possible. The moment the Vaxians realized humans had been reverse engineering captured alien tech, they would become aware of the probe itself. That awareness would spark questions about how long Earth had been preparing, what other surprises might exist, and would almost certainly provoke a full-scale military retaliation before humanity could produce additional ships. Griffin asked how long such a complex ruse could realistically endure, and Price responded that it relied entirely on Captain Morrison, maintaining composure during the critical negotiation phase soon to begin. Back at the standoff, the 1-hour deadline Morrison had set was rapidly approaching. The Vaxian fleet had neither retreated to a safe distance nor initiated any form of attack. They lingered in a state of collective hesitation, their formation beginning to fray as individual captains, awaited instructions from commanders who themselves were waiting on guidance from higher authorities. Morrison recognized the stakes were absolute. Showed too much force or aggression, and the Empire would perceive an existential threat and unleash full-scale destruction. Show too little, and the Vaxians would discern the bluff and proceed with their invasion. Lieutenant Kevin Ross reported from communications that a focused transmission was incoming from the Vaxian flagship.
Always.
Morrison rose from his command chair, adjusted his uniform, and instructed Ross to notify the Vaxian commander that he would meet under neutral conditions. He specified that the negotiation would occur in conference room to aboard the Constellation, with a maximum of 3 officers from each side. The terms were accepted almost instantly, and Morrison recognized from the speed of the response that Zilthor was desperate to grasp the situation before committing to any action. Martinez stepped closer to Morrison and lowered her voice so that only he could hear, asking whether meeting with the aliens was wise, given how little they truly knew about Vaxian intentions or capabilities. Morrison acknowledged her concerns but explained that they already knew exactly what the Vaxians planned, because the captured probe contained detailed invasion strategies. The Empire wanted to understand their opposition before initiating war, and humanity needed to convince them that any such war would be their final mistake. He added that the negotiation would be just as significant as the weapons demonstration, because well-chosen words could be as decisive as railguns when deployed effectively. The conference room had been meticulously prepared, with every detail designed to convey a message about human capabilities. Holographic star charts were projected along the walls, showing not only Earth's solar system, but hundreds of other star systems, each mapped with precise detail. This was a carefully constructed illusion, as most of the data had been extrapolated from the incomplete files recovered from the captured probe, but the Vaxians would have no way of knowing that. The map suggested humanity had been exploring and surveying the galaxy far longer than anyone suspected, and possessed navigational knowledge that should have taken centuries to acquire. Commander Zelthor entered the room with 2 senior officers, their weapons secured in ceremonial bindings as mandated by standard parley protocols apparently, observed even among alien civilizations. His gaze swept across the chamber, and Morrison could see him cataloging every detail, attempting to determine what it all meant. Across the polished table, Morrison sat flanked by Sullivan and Martinez, projecting an air of calm confidence that suggested they held far more leverage than they revealed. Zelthor wasted no time with pleasantries. His opening words directly challenged the existence of Morrison's ship, stating that it should not exist according to all known Imperial intelligence on human technological development. The Vaxian commander emphasized that their reconnaissance indicated humanity was at least 2 centuries from achieving faster-than-light travel. Yet here was a vessel with FTL drives and weapons surpassing Imperial specifications. His tone combined accusation with confusion, as though suspecting a trick, but unable to identify it. Morrison leaned back slightly, allowing a small, measured smile before replying. He stated that Vaxian intelligence had been given precisely what humanity intended them to see. He asked whether Zelthor truly believed humans could be unaware of surveillance drones, orbiting their planet or satellites monitoring communications. The question lingered, a subtle challenge, and Morrison watched doubt ripple across the alien commander's face. It was a masterful bluff built on fragments of truth. As the humans had only discovered the Watchers 3 years earlier, accidentally, when a solar flare disrupted the cloaking of several probes. Simultaneously, Zelthor's mandibles clicked, a gesture Morrison had learned indicated frustration or deep consideration, and the commander shifted the discussion from technology to matters of territory and legal claims. He flatly declared that the Vaxian Empire had claimed this sector for expansion, and that Earth fell squarely within their territory. He added that the Galactic Council recognized their claim under colonization protocols, implying humanity had no legal right to contest Imperial presence. His tone suggested the argument should end the discussion, as territorial law was considered absolute, enforced by the combined might of numerous spacefaring civilizations. Martinez responded before Morrison could speak, sliding a datapad across the table to the Vaxian delegation. She explained that the Council recognized claims only on unoccupied systems, and that Earth had been continuously inhabited for over 10,000 years. Therefore, the Empire's claim was invalid under Council law. She cited the specific subsection and paragraph from the colonization treaties. Her voice was crisp and authoritative, as though she had studied galactic law for decades. Though in reality, the information came solely from the probe's limited legal database. Zelthor's eyes widened, a look Morrison recognized as genuine shock, and the alien commander's gaze dropped to the datapad now resting before him. The ramifications of Martinez's statements cascaded through his mind, and Morrison could almost see the calculations forming behind those alien eyes. If humans understood Council law in such precise detail, it implied they had communicated with the Council itself. If contact had been made, then treaties, recognition, and protection under galactic law were in place. If Earth had Council protection, the Empire could not simply invade without violating multiple interstellar agreements and potentially drawing other major powers into a conflict threatening Vaxian interests across several sectors. The Vaxian commander's voice tightened as he demanded to know when humanity had made contact with the Galactic Council. Morrison maintained his slight smile, replying that such information was classified and could not be shared with potential adversaries. He stated, "What matters is not when contact occurred, but that it deigned that any aggression against Earth will be considered an act of war, not just against humanity, but against all Council signatories bound by agreements with Earth." It was the boldest and riskiest bluff of the entire negotiation, because humanity had no such treaties and had never directly communicated with the Council. Yet the Vaxian Empire had rivals and enemies who would welcome any pretext to curb their relentless expansion. Zelthor remained silent for nearly a full minute, his officers exchanging anxious glances but remaining quiet. Knowing their commander wrestled with a decision that could reshape the Empire's future, the calculations were merciless. If the humans were truthful about Council recognition, an invasion would trigger mutual defense pacts, bringing fleets from a dozen civilizations onto Vaxian holdings. If they were lying, attacking remained dangerous, as that single warship had demonstrated weapon capabilities, implying a fleet of comparable technology. Either way, proceeding with the invasion was no longer feasible. Without additional intelligence, the alien commander finally stated he needed to consult High Command before making any decisions. Morrison nodded, as though this was expected, and said Zelthor had 6 hours to receive orders and report the Empire's decision. After that, the Constellation would assume hostile intent and respond with appropriate force. The time limit created pressure, while giving the Vaxian leadership space to deliberate, ideally encouraging retreat over war. As the delegation exited the conference room toward their shuttle, Sullivan exhaled a long-held breath and quietly asked Morrison if he believed the Vaxians had accepted their story regarding council recognition and treaties. Morrison replied that they had believed enough to hesitate, and hesitation was precisely what humanity needed. The objective had never been to convince the Vaxians Earth was invincible, but that any attack would cost far more than potential gain. Deep beneath Earth's surface in the fortified strategic command bunker, Admiral Price observed the negotiation on her screens. Director Griffin sat beside her, tablet in hand, full of contingency plans for multiple outcomes. Griffin asked what would occur if the Vaxians called the bluff and attacked despite the risk. Price paused before responding that if the Empire chose war, the Constellation would fight, and they would pray that one ship could buy Earth enough time to prepare for a prolonged conflict. Dr. Bennett interjected from another console, reminding them that the Constellation was more than a single ship. Ship symbolized what humanity could achieve when pushed to the brink. The vessel embodied 15 years of relentless effort. Merging human ingenuity with alien technology the Vaxians had never imagined. Every system surpassed Imperial specifications, and the crew had trained for years to operate at peak efficiency. In battle, the Constellation would not yield easily and would take many Vaxian ships with it. Price acknowledged Bennett's assessment, her expression grave. Aware that one ship could win a battle, but could not win a war against an empire spanning hundreds of worlds. The demonstration and negotiation were buying time for Earth to construct additional vessels, establish contact with the Galactic Council, and forge alliances necessary for survival. The outcome depended entirely on the Vaxians, choosing withdrawal rather than immediate attack. The following 6 hours dragged painfully. Every constellation sensor locked on the Vaxian fleet, monitoring power readings, weapon status, and shield fluctuations. Captain Morrison remained on the bridge throughout, projecting calm assurance. Though his mind raced through endless scenarios, the crew mirrored his composure, executing their duties with disciplined precision and absolute trust in their commander. Each person on the bridge understood they might be about to engage in the most consequential battle in human history, and were ready to do whatever was required. Claire Hopkins reported from sensors that the Vaxian flagship was moving, Dominion's Wrath repositioning toward the neutral zone markers. Bridge personnel exchanged quick glances, and Morrison felt a flicker of tension, even as his expression remained neutral. This was the pivotal moment. The movement could indicate retreat or a tactical reposition to optimize firing solutions. The next few seconds would determine if humanity had successfully bluffed their way to safety, or faced 200 warships in combat. Then, one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion, the other Vaxian vessels began following their flagship toward the boundary. The massive fleet that had seemed so threatening just hours earlier was now retreating from Earth's space, returning toward Imperial territory. Morrison allowed himself a long, steady breath and exchanged a look with Sullivan, who seemed equally stunned that their desperate plan had succeeded. Martinez was updating the tactical display, confirming that all hostile vessels were indeed withdrawing and showing no signs of charging weapons or shields for combat. Commander Zelthor transmitted a final message, his image appearing on the main view screen with a carefully neutral expression, revealing nothing of his thoughts or emotions. His voice was formal as he stated that the Vaxian Empire acknowledged Earth's territorial claim and would withdraw from the sector pending proper arbitration by the Galactic Council. He added that this was not an admission of defeat or recognition of human superiority, but merely a postponement of final resolution until all legal matters could be properly addressed. The statement was clearly designed to save face and preserve Imperial dignity, Yet the practical outcome remained the same. The fleet was leaving, and Earth was safe for now. Morrison nodded slowly, replying that he understood the commander's position and wished the Vaxian fleet a safe return to their territory. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in a brief, stunned silence as everyone processed the events. Then the quiet broke, giving way to barely contained celebration as officers congratulated one another. Relief washing over the crew like a tangible wave, Martinez allowed herself a rare smile. And Sullivan laughed aloud before clapping Morrison on the shoulder, hard enough to make the captain stumble slightly. He spoke with genuine disbelief that they had actually pulled it off. Morrison corrected him gently, emphasizing that they had bought time. But the true challenge was only beginning. The celebration subsided as the crew absorbed his meaning, realizing that the confrontation with the Vaxian fleet was just the start of a far longer and more complex struggle. Humanity had revealed itself to the galaxy, and there was no undoing that truth. Soon everyone would know Earth existed. They would want to understand how humans had built a ship like the Constellation and what other capabilities they might possess. Deep beneath the surface in Strategic Defense Command, Admiral Price stood before the planet's most powerful figures: Senator Karen Wright, chair of the Intelligence Committee; Secretary of Defense Charles Brennan, overseeing all military operations; and President Linda Foster herself, bearing ultimate responsibility for humanity's survival. Price reported that the Vaxian fleet had withdrawn from Earth's territory, but cautioned that this was only the beginning of a much longer struggle. She explained that humanity had revealed itself to the galaxy, creating questions that demanded answers. And the Empire would not simply forget Earth or cease trying to comprehend its technological advancements. President Foster asked how long it would be before the Vaxians discovered the truth about the constellation's origins. Dr. Bennett stepped forward, explaining that the ship had been built from reverse-engineered alien technology, though it was far from a simple copy. Human engineers had innovated, creating hybrid systems combining Earth designs with Vaxian principles, producing results that even Imperial engineers could not have predicted. In some instances, constellation systems surpassed Imperial equivalents. As humans were not bound by the assumptions and traditions that constrained Vaxian innovation, the vessel represented the best of both worlds. Making it unique in the galaxy, Secretary Brennan highlighted the obvious limitation. Humanity only had one ship, and one vessel could not confront an entire galaxy of potential threats. President Foster nodded, but her response displayed the steel that had carried her to the highest office. She declared that if humanity could stand against the Empire with one ship, it could prove their worth among the stars by building more. She authorized Admiral Price to expand the naval shipbuilding program immediately, setting a goal of 10 additional ships like the Constellation within 5 years. The room erupted in discussion as officials debated resources, personnel, and logistics for such an ambitious undertaking. Price waited for silence, then outlined that constructing additional vessels would require immense resources, complete dedication of thousands of skilled workers, and absolute secrecy. She emphasized that the moment the galaxy learned Earth was building a fleet, other powers would attempt to stop them through diplomacy, economic pressure, or direct military action. President Foster's response was immediate and uncompromising. Let anyone try, because humanity had survived. By never backing down from challenges or accepting imposed limitations, aboard the Constellation, Captain Morrison stood at the observation window. Watching Earth slowly rotate in the distance, the blue and white marble had never appeared more beautiful or fragile. Lisa Martinez joined him, offering a cup of coffee from the nearby dispenser. She asked what would happen next. Morrison considered carefully, then replied that they would now explore, make real contact with the Galactic Council, find allies sharing their values, and prepare for the inevitable day when the Vaxians returned, because they certainly would. Martinez asked if he thought humanity was ready for that confrontation. Morrison smiled, implying that they had just convinced the most powerful military force in the galaxy that Earth was prepared for anything. Perhaps, if they kept pretending long enough, humanity would actually become what the aliens feared. Martinez laughed softly, calling it a brilliant strategy. Morrison agreed, adding that it was the human way. They had been punching above their weight class since climbing down from the trees, and there was no reason to stop now. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their homeworld, both understanding that everything had changed and there was no going back to the way things were. Far across the galaxy, in the heart of the Vaxian Empire, on Vaxia Prime, Fleet Admiral Corvus reviewed reports from the Kepler Expanse with mounting fury. The human ship had been real, its weapons devastatingly effective, and its threat could not be dismissed. Yet Corvus had commanded and won over 100 campaigns across dozens of worlds, and he knew that one ship, no matter how advanced, could not stand against the full might of an empire spanning hundreds of star systems. Humanity had won this battle through audacity, deception, and precise timing, but Corvus was certain that when the real war arrived, and it would, they would learn that boldness alone could not guarantee survival. He began issuing orders across every branch of imperial intelligence and military research, demanding that resources be redirected toward studying human technology and developing countermeasures. Spy networks would be expanded tenfold, and surveillance of human space intensified. Most importantly, the Empire's research divisions would focus on weapons and defenses specifically designed to counter humanity's advantages. Corva's new Earth currently held the element of surprise, but surprise could only be leveraged once. The humans had bought themselves time, yes, but in doing so, they had also started a countdown toward an inevitable conflict that would decide the fate of both civilizations.